Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking the code on a huge question. Why are some countries just so rich while others are stuck in poverty? The answer is all about economic growth, and we're going to use a really foundational model that completely changed how we think about this stuff.
Just think about it for a second. The world has changed more in the last 2 centuries than in the 20,000 years before that. Why? It's all because of sustained, continuous economic growth that has totally reshaped our world. So what's the engine? What's really driving this incredible transformation?
Well, to find that answer, we've got to go back a bit, to the 1950s, and look at the work of an economist who came up with a revolutionary way to explain it all, a model that would, deservedly, win him a Nobel Prize.
And that economist's name was Robert Solow. Back in 1956, he developed a model that, for all its simplicity, gave us this incredibly powerful new way to understand what really drives a country's prosperity in the long run.
Now, Solow himself was the first to admit his model wasn't, a perfect map of the economy. He saw it more like a scouting mission, a way to get the lay of the land and figure out the most important forces at play.
Okay, so let's dive into the model itself. The starting point is actually super simple, really intuitive. Give workers better tools, and they'll get more done.
In the world of economics, these tools have a name: capital. We're talking about everything from a tractor for a farmer, to a computer for a software developer, to the entire factory that builds a car. The basic idea here is that the more capital each worker has, the more stuff they can produce.
Right, so how does a country actually get more of this capital? Well, it all starts with saving. When people and companies save some of their income, that pool of money can then be invested in new capital, new factories, better machines. This increases the amount of capital each worker has, which in turn boosts their output, which means more income, which means you can save even more. It's a virtuous cycle.
But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. According to the model, this engine, this cycle of capital accumulation, it can't just run forever. It eventually hits a pretty serious roadblock.
And that roadblock is called diminishing returns. Think about it this way. Giving a farmer their first tractor is a game changer. Huge productivity boost. A second tractor, it's useful for sure, but not as much of a leap as the first one. A 10th tractor, it's probably just gathering dust in a barn. Each new tool adds a little less to the pile than the one before it, and that means growth from just adding more capital has to slow down.
So this sets up a kind of balancing act, right? On one side of the scale, you have all the new investment that's adding more capital. But on the other side, you have something called break-even investment. That's the amount you have to invest just to stay in the same place. You see, there are two things constantly trying to drain our stock of capital. First, machines get old, they break down, they wear out. That's depreciation. And second, if your population is growing, you need to build new tools just to make sure the new workers have something to work with.
So you can see where this is going. Because of those diminishing returns we talked about, the extra bang you get for your buck from new investment gets smaller and smaller. Eventually, you hit a point where all your new investment is just enough to replace the old machines and equip the new workers. That's it. This point is called the steady state. And here, growth per person just stops, dead in its tracks.
Okay, so this leaves us with a massive puzzle. If the model says that growth based on just piling up capital eventually fizzles out, how on earth do we explain the last 200 years of non-stop progress?
And this, right here, is the absolute genius of Solow's model. The fact that it fails to explain the sustained growth is what makes it so brilliant. It proves, beyond a doubt, that capital alone can't be the whole story. It forces us to look for the real engine of prosperity.
The answer is technological progress, innovation, new ideas, basically finding better recipes that let us make more stuff with the same amount of labor and capital. Technology is the secret sauce that lets us keep pushing back against those diminishing returns.
So the big takeaway here is that just piling up more of the same old tools isn't going to cut it for long-term prosperity. The real key, the true driver of growth, is inventing better tools and finding smarter ways to do things.
Okay, so theory is great, but how does this beefed-up model, the one with technology in it, actually stack up against reality? Let's check the data.
Well, on one hand, it's a huge success. Qualitatively, it nails it. It shows how technology can lead to the sustained growth in living standards that we see all around us, and it matches a bunch of other long-term trends we see in modern economies. So far, so good.
But, and here's the next big plot twist, when you look at the numbers, specifically the gap between rich and poor countries, the model just falls flat.
Based on what it knows about capital and technology, it predicts the richest nation should be maybe 4 times wealthier than the poorest. But in the real world, that gap is more like 40 to 1. It's not even close.
So what are we missing? What's the secret ingredient? Well, in the 1990s, a new generation of economists realized Solow's original model was missing a completely different type of investment: human capital. It's not just about the tools workers have. It's about the skills, the knowledge, and the education inside their heads.
And it turns out, once you stir human capital into the mix, the model's ability to explain what's happening in the real world just skyrockets. Yeah, physical capital, the machines, explains part of the difference. But it's the differences in education and skills, along with technology and good institutions, that account for most of that giant gap between countries.
Get this, with this final piece of the puzzle, the augmented model, the one with both physical and human capital, can now explain roughly 80% of the income differences we see across the globe. 80%! That is a huge jump in predictive power.
And this just brings us full circle, right back to Solow's original idea. His model was never meant to be the final, perfect answer. It was a reconnaissance tool, and what a tool it was. It led us on an exploration from physical capital to technology, and finally to the crucial importance of human capital.
So that leaves us with one last really big question. We've identified the engines of growth: physical capital, human capital, technology. But as the slide says, what steers them? Why are some countries so much better at creating the right policies, the right institutions, the right culture to let those engines roar to life? Answering that, well, that's the next great challenge in understanding the wealth of nations.